Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Lane County Board of Commissioners meeting for Tuesday, March 15th. We'll start off with adjustments to the agenda. We do have an 11 o'clock time certain and an executive session. Are there any other adjustments? No. Okay. Seeing none, we'll move to public comment. This is the time in the agenda when we allocate 20 minutes for speakers to bring to the attention anything they feel important to the Board of Commissioners. We limit it to 3 minutes apiece. We do have one person this morning signed up and possibly somebody else would like to speak. So Mike McFadden, would you like to come forward and state your name and I guess city you live in for the record, and go ahead.
Good morning. I'm Mike McFadden from Eugene. Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. I wanted to talk a little bit. First, I want to remember a person who passed away a few months ago. Peg Morton was a local community activist here in town. She had a lot of really controversial views about, taxation, especially in regards to military funding. And regardless of what you felt about her opinions on those things, you could definitely not argue with the fact that she was pretty brave and stood up for what she believed in one instance going to federal prison for her protests at Fort Benning. But one of the last letters that she published, which was actually published posthumously, was a letter that implored everybody, but most importantly people in positions of responsibility and decision making, to keep the rural communities in mind, especially in Lane County, and the people who live in rural communities. She was a very compassionate and thoughtful person, and I think it says a lot that that's one of the last things that she wanted to impart to everybody before she left the earth. So I wanted to pick up on that. I had the great fortune to grow up in a rural community. I've heard some of the commissioners talk about their experience also, which I've shared. I've gotten to, raise prize livestock and show them in the fair and participate in things like 4-H and stuff. And all of the other, really important life skills that one can learn growing up in a rural environment, in a rural community. But at the same time, growing up in a rural community, I've seen several generations of friends, family, and neighbors fall into, drug addiction. I've seen, the fabric of communities be slowly eroded by criminal activity moving in. A lot of it is actually organized. Before District Attorney Gardner left for his new position, I had the chance to talk with him, and he was very frank with me about how Lane County is in a position where organized criminals, many of whom are involved in human trafficking, drug smuggling, up and down the I-5 corridor and the 101 corridor, see Lane County as a target and have identified it and moved in and are doing business here in Lane County because they feel like they can operate with impunity. And that happens especially in rural areas. And so it's not just an urban problem. And I've seen so many people, not get the mental health treatment they need, or even the just basic medical care they need because of the geographic distances involved, and people subsisting on Social Security income or very limited income. I see infrastructure just dilapidated and crumbling. And when it comes back, circling around to Peg Morton and her, opposition to all of the militaristic adventurism that's gone on in the past decades, which is deplorable in the morass we find ourselves in now because of all of that, misguided war. I've seen friends, classmates go off to war because they had no financial, opportunities, and then they come back, both spiritually and physically broken. Some of them fall into cycles of addiction. Some of them commit suicide, and I hear from them that, that when they were sent over there to fight in these wars, the most that they were fighting for wasn't democracy, wasn't the cause of these wars, but was to keep them and their fellow soldiers alive. And so I just think it's really deplorable that we send our people off to suffer in those kind of environments where their basic, objective is their own human survival and that of their fellow people around them, and not for any real reasons that we need to fight these things. So we need to remember our rural communities. They're integral to the vitality of the future of Lane County and other places, and we need to, value our neighbors there and take care of them. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to the board that didn't get a chance to sign up this morning? Okay. So item number 3, we'll move to Commissioner's response to the public comments and/or issues and remonstrance. Have anybody this morning? Commissioner Lycan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to just kind of add on a little bit to Mike's comments this morning about rural communities, and I frankly agree. And in fact, one of the things I was noticing when traveling through Oak Ridge is they're unable to sustain their McDonald's anymore. And we made a brief comment last meeting that I find it interesting. The legislature made the decision that somehow Mapleton and Oak Ridge are on the same playing field as the city of Eugene when it comes to the minimum wage, which frankly could really be harmful to our local communities, our rural communities. But on top of that, unfortunately, I think what we've seen as well is maybe the federal government has turned their back on rural America as much as any that I've seen, and it's been painful. And to watch what has happened to different areas of our not just here in Oregon, but throughout the United States and rural communities as a whole. When my grandfather was in the legislature, when Faye's great uncle was in the legislature, rural legislative leaders had a very strong voice in Salem back in the 60s and even into the 70s that doesn't really exist anymore. And I find that to be very, very unfortunate. In fact, I was always proud to say my grandfather was one of the original writers of the community college bill that we have established today. And Faye's great uncle was an incredible leader when it came to open space and the protection of the Pacific Ocean, that open space, that environmental protection on the coast. But yet we're lacking that. And so I really appreciate your comments because I think you're absolutely right on. And it's something that I strongly believe in, and hopefully we can, not only this board, but really be a voice working with our partners in Salem, but most importantly, I think working with our partners back in Washington, D.C. So appreciate your comments this morning.
Mr. Farr?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I grew up in a rural community also, land of cheese, trees, and ocean breeze, Tillamook. And when I was there, it was a fairly robust economy in Tillamook, but nowadays Tillamook is a pretty bust economy. It's kind of off the beaten path as far as travel is concerned. Cheese and dairy does not sustain the families that once thrived in Tillamook, and you drive past a lot of mill sites that formerly operated where many jobs were provided. And really, I agree also, rural communities have been ignored, and in no small part by the federal government. So it's time that we all band together and make certain that our rural communities, many of which are here in Lane County, but all throughout Oregon, are represented well. And thank you, Commissioner Lycan, for bringing that up. I just have a couple of date announcements. Tomorrow, March 16th, the Equity and Human Rights Task Force meeting will have a public open forum, open meeting at Campbell Center at 6 o'clock in the evening. And everybody's invited. The task force has been meeting since October of last year when it was first formed, and is preparing to make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners and to the administrator regarding the future work of a advisory board, which will be advisory to the administrator regarding equity and human rights. Pretty exciting work that's happening. Very good involvement, a lot of public input so far. Looking forward to a lot more tomorrow at Campbell Center. Serenity Lane had its ribbon cutting last Friday. Commissioner Stewart and I were both there, and a very large audience, despite the wind and cold and rain as it started to come down later, but a lot of folks were there. Serenity Lane is a part of our behavioral health agenda. Private and non-profit agencies in the community to pool with our federally qualified health centers to make certain that men and women have access to behavioral health care, particularly in Serenity Lane's case to addiction disorders. And addiction disorders are certainly a part of our behavioral health effort. Our FQHCs provide behavioral and physical health under the same roof. We're one of the few places in the nation, actually, that happens on such a broad scale. So we are moving forward with behavioral health, and thanks to Serenity Lane and to Mike Dyer, who's the CEO and president of Serenity Lane. And Friday at City Club, there will be a presentation on Build a Better Bethel, which is we're undergoing that out in Bethel, finding ways to make certain that Bethel is an attractive gateway to the community and continues to be an attractive place to live, to send your kids to school, and to thrive and have great recreation opportunities. So that'll be at City Club at noon on Friday. And then finally on St. Paddy's Day, 2 days from now, a lot of things are happening, but one of the most exciting things is that the Poverty and Homelessness Board will be meeting at noon, and they'll be meeting out at the Surbu Center, and that is a public meeting open to the public, and there's opportunity for public input at that meeting. Thank you.
Others? Commissioner Bozovich?
Yeah, I'd just like to thank Mike for coming in and bringing one Peg Morton back up. She was a courageous woman, and also bringing the issue of rural communities to our attention again. I got the opportunity to attend the Indian Creek landscape plan meeting with the U.S. Forest Service down in Mapleton, and the citizens of Mapleton aren't very happy about the idea of what the Forest Service is planning there, because it's basically a plan to shut the forest down over time. And they remember when the forest used to employ most of the citizens of Mapleton, and now I don't have the figures in front of me, but there was one gentleman that stood up and mentioned that when he graduated from Mapleton High School, he graduated with a class of over 100, and now they're graduating a class of 30. And what's happened to that community over time, and just the failure of the Northwest Forest Plan in general to, one, protect the spotted owl from the barred owl, and the attempt at trying to protect the spotted owl. And I hate to use the word consensus when I talk about science, but it's the general consensus of most biologists now that the spotted owl will become extinct in the Coast Range, no matter what we do. If we were to completely stop logging today, that the barred owl is just out competing it, and it will go extinct. So the folks down in Mapleton are a little bit upset about the whole idea of closing off that whole 4,000 acres of forest purely to try and protect an animal that's going extinct anyway. And there was quite a discussion between the citizens and the Forest Service down there, and it reflects on the federal government's abandonment of rural communities and the management of the federal lands they own in those rural communities. Not to mention just what even what our state legislature has done to damage rural communities in kind of conglomerating them with metro areas, and everything from the minimum wage laws to the coal energy bill that just passed. It's going to raise the utility bills for all those folks in those rural communities that are currently suffering socioeconomic depression. Misery on top of misery for those folks out in the rural communities, and they really need a voice, and they really need to have something done to protect them. And I will continue to work as this board to try and lift up our rural communities in Lane County, including our outreach to them in our Health and Human Services Department, in our Veteran Services officers that actually travel to rural communities to connect veterans with services. So I think it's, thank you for bringing that up. And it's an issue I'm particularly focused on. And hopefully we'll get somewhere eventually, and our rural communities will be back to thriving. All those closed mills around Mapleton, maybe one day, will be back in operation, and folks will be able to go out and earn a living with a high school degree in the woods that supports a family of four.
All right. Thank you. And I would just too like to say thank you, Mike, for bringing this rural concern forward. As a person that's lived in Cottage Grove my entire life and got to see, I lived in an area where I attended some of the smallest rural schools in the South Lane School District, and when I was a kid growing up, there wasn't the problems that we have today, and folks had jobs and they were able to provide for their family. It was a good single family wage jobs could provide for the entire family. And today we've struggled. We've watched the last 25 years as those jobs have disappeared, and we haven't been able to really transition to other opportunities. But that being said, I want to say that the Board of Commissioners, I believe, has been working hard the last few years. by whether it's starting with recognizing the need for industrial lands and rezoning the Goshen area, or the investments that we've helped with Coburg up there, with refilling those vacant Monaco buildings, to supporting a call center in Veneta, or a grant to Territorial Seed to leave, to help them stay in the community, to the investments in the regional fiber to see it actually lit. I mean, we're building infrastructure, and hopefully we'll be able to transition and see some new opportunities for those folks. But in the meantime, we do have to step up with the resources we have and address the things that have been discussed, whether it's mental health or domestic violence, or poverty from the standpoint they can't provide their own food and shelter. So, we have some major challenges, but I do believe that this board's worked hard to try to turn the ship and make some new opportunities. So, thanks for giving us the opportunity to bring this up and talk about this very important topic. Anybody else? All right. So next is emergency business. I don't believe we have any emergency business today. Is that right, Mr. Mokaiski? No emergency business? Okay. Item 5 is the consent calendar. We have several items on there today. These are considered to be routine if there's, and acted upon in one motion. If there's concerns about an item, that can be pulled from the consent calendar and dealt with individually. This and the entire agenda can be accessed on lanecounty.org website under the Commissioners' meeting agenda, and all the supporting documentation for all these items are listed if you're interested in learning more about specific items. So with Commissioner Farr.
I move passage of the consent calendar of Tuesday, March 15, 2016.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes 5-0. Thank you. Item 6 is county administration. The first item, A, is announcements. Mr. Mokaiski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, just a couple of brief announcements for you. Thank you, Commissioner Farr, for mentioning the meeting tomorrow, the equity town hall meeting that we have, and I'll just say it again, Wednesday, March 16th at 5:30 at the Campbell Community Center, 155 High Street. And a comment also on that, we'll have an update for the board on April 5th on our equity and human rights task force work. I attended a meeting last week, and there was Commissioner Farr was part of that discussion, and I can tell you that in the draft recommendations for the creation of the advisory board on equity and human rights, there is a required representation from rural areas of Lane County. So just to add to the discussion here today about making sure that we continue our focus on rural communities in Lane County, we felt that that was appropriate. Certainly in the various discussions we've had with community members, that we make sure we have rural representation on our equity and human rights advisory committee work. I also want to share with the board that we and we'll have an update for you at a later time, but just to let you know that we continue our work on collaborating with community stakeholders around a downtown public market. And we have a work group, a public market work group that has been meeting, has a meeting this week, I believe on Thursday, around the same time as the Poverty and Homelessness Board meeting. That group includes representation and facilitation by the University of Oregon, participation by Lane Community College, City of Eugene, Lane County Farmers Market, and other community partners. So we continue that focus, and while we haven't had a lot of discussions with the board about that issue of late, there is a lot of work that's going into coordinating and facilitating discussions around what a future public market in downtown Eugene should look like and should include. I also want to mention there's a lot of talk here about investments in rural Lane County, and for those who aren't aware, I know the commissioners are certainly aware that we've had 2 Hatfield Fellows, Steve and Aniko, that we have brought on board for the past several months, who've been dedicated to working with rural communities in coastal Lane County, in the Florence area, as well as in the McKenzie River area. And that has just been outstanding work in working with those communities, developing a framework for investment in economic development in rural Lane County, and it is helping to create the foundation for a plan that we will bring forward and discuss more as part of the fiscal year 16-17 budget. Our continued focus and efforts to partner with rural Lane County on economic development work. So more to come on that, but I just wanted to remind those who may not even be aware that we've worked with those Hatfield Fellows over the past several months. Aniko recently got a job at the University of Oregon, so she's moved on, but Steve is still with us for the next few months to continue that work. And that's all that I have right now, Mr. Chair, unless you have any questions for me.
Any questions or comments? I guess, Mr. Murkowski, I just wanted to call out, you talked about diversity and equity and that at the start, and I wanted to just call out Mr. Rickoff. This last week I had a constituent down in Cottage Grove that gave me a call. It happens to be a same-sex couple living together that seems to be some real concerns about treatment by their neighbors, and I talked to the sheriff to find out what kind of legal opportunities there were, and because it's not a domestic situation, they can't get restraining orders and different things. But I just wanted to say thank you to Greg for making that call, and he's lining up some folks that can offer some support, and which I think these individuals need desperately at this time. So just thank you for your staff, the great work that they do, and the compassion that they do it with. So thank you with that.
Yep, I second that. Thank you.
May I ask a clarification on that? They could not receive support because they were a same-sex couple as opposed to a...
Yeah, it's not a typical, and it happens to be, it's not between the two individuals themselves, it's with their neighbors, so there's no restraining orders. The restraining orders are typically for domestic situations, and there is trespass laws and different things like that, but the limitations are pretty, according to the Sheriff's Department, are very limited as to what they can do in this situation without some concrete proof and different things. So, but I think we'll get through this, and we're offering them help. So I appreciate that from our staff. Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Concerning this work that we're doing to be more open and accessible, not only for the populations we're currently being open and accessible, but for a broader group, and for sake of discussion, maybe call that diversity efforts that we're making, both in our employment and interior to Lane County, and how people are treated that work at Lane County. We're still one of the largest employers in the county, so we do set an example in that respect. But also in our efforts to help people, as Commissioner Stewart just mentioned, efforts that we can make to be more outreach. And we often think of these things as racial. That is, we're not helping one group as much as we're helping another group by race. But I also think that there's a growing number of people that identify as having disabilities, people with disabilities, and that is often expressed in the form of disabilities you can see. Maybe someone is using a cane or a walker or a wheelchair, but there's many other disabilities. And the one that I wanted to bring up, so in generic categories, people with disabilities, but within that would be people with hearing loss. The number of people with hearing loss in our community is now in excess of 10%. And the ability of government and the ability of people to understand what government is doing depends upon them being able to see and hear what government's doing. So the Hearing Loss Association of Oregon and their parent national group have a lot of material about what local governments and what business can do to make things more accessible to people with hearing loss. And given the large number of people afflicted by this and affected by it, I think that we should get on top of, the curve and figure out what other people are doing to affect this group, because it is a fairly large group, and we would not want to ignore a group this big in any other context. So that's just my perspective, and I think that we're making great strides with this idea of a task force and going about it very carefully. And I would just encourage anybody that's watching and hearing our meeting that if they want to get involved with this, to contact you. And I appreciate all the great work that's being done on this.
Thank you, Commissioner.
All right. Thanks, Steve. Thank you. Next is item B under County Administration. It's order/resolution 16-3-15-08. It's a matter of adopting the fiscal year 15-16 supplemental budget number 2, making, reducing, and transferring appropriations. I'd like to welcome Ms. Williams, our Budget and Strategic Planning Supervisor. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Stewart, Commissioners. I'm here to present the second supplemental budget to you, and this is a routine item. We typically do 3 or 4 supplemental budgets during every fiscal year, and it's really just to update our budget and information. And we time this second supplemental with the preparation that we're doing with the next year's budget. We're building the proposed budget currently, so we want to have the most up-to-date numbers for comparison factors when we're proposing or publishing that budget document so that we can compare current year to the budget year. So just briefly, I can go through a very quick summary. Per Oregon budget law, we are required to have a public hearing if there's any funds that are changing 10% or more. So this is a much smaller supplemental budget than the prior one, and no funds were being changed by 10% or more, so we did not have a public hearing. So there's no need for a public hearing this morning. And again, the supplemental really just gives the departments, again, an opportunity to adjust revenues that are coming in, higher or lower. They've been awarded grants, and they have a little bit more specific information on the actual dollars received, and any other FTE updates as well. So a quick summary. The supplemental budget does increase the total county resources by $2,403,098. Expense appropriations are also increasing by $1,710,440, with reserves increasing by $692,658. The total FTE for this supplemental increasing is 15.5, and with this update, our county's current modified budget is now $599,338,796, with a total of 1,475.46 FTE across all funds. So with that, since there's no public hearing, I can turn it over if there's any questions.
Okay, Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Williams, I just have a couple of quick questions in case anybody's following along with the additional items, supplemental items that Commissioner Stewart mentioned at the start of the meeting. I'm looking at just a couple of line items on here, just asking you to explain how that's determined. So, for instance, Parks and Open Space Fund 216, the change amount is $44,024, and it lists a new total. Of that $44,000, I'm not asking you specifically for that particular fund, but where might that money come from? Where might that additional $44,000 come from? What typical sources?
Let me see if I have that exact. So, Chair Stewart, Commissioners, for example, for 216, as you brought up, that fund does get car rental tax. So this is a change in increasing the car rental tax. And with that, they're also changing or updating their expenses to match that.
So each of these line items has a list of the specifics as to where it came from in the larger document. Okay.
Correct.
And that was just a general question that I had. The next one is General Road Fund 225, which has a decrease of almost $250,000. Now, where would decreases come from?
And to answer a specific for the road fund, it looks like they're reducing some of their general expense debt payments, so putting some money towards bond and paying off debt.
Okay.
Bond payments.
So then just generally speaking, an increase can come from perhaps additional additional revenue sources or from savings inside the department, and decreases can come from debt reduction, for instance.
Correct.
Or from a decrease in anticipated revenues, presumably. Okay, just wanted a general response to that. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Commissioner Bozovich?
Thank you. In the memo, you note that we're making adjustments to general fund revenues on the upside for various things like the actual amount of the ONC timber payment. But you noted that we're also decreasing revenues to match the actual timber sales revenue. Now, knowing ONC is in lieu of federal, so I'm assuming that the timber sales revenue you're referring to is from state forest revenue. And could you tell me how much that dropped below our original estimate?
Chair Stewart, Commissioner Bozovich, it is the state timber revenue that is decreasing. It's coming in lower than anticipated, so we're reducing that amount by $350,750. And I don't have the original amount that we projected, but I can get that information. But it's a reduction of $350,000.
Yeah, just for those folks that wonder why Lynn County is suing the state.
Commissioner Lyken?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to, Commissioner Farr, thanks for bringing up the parks. I'm going to look at Mr. Kyler. The change in the formula from the state, we changed, it was at 65. I think this budget is 60, and then next year will be 55% allocated to the counties. Is that correct? When we worked with the state parks? Yeah. I believe that's what it was. I think the first year, so there's a potential we're going to see even a larger increase in revenue coming to our parks next year because the AOC and actually we worked with Senator Edwards on this, and we got a formula change. So originally, based on the RV fees, the state was keeping 65% and then allocating 35% of the counties. First year went to 60%, and then it's going to be a permanent 55% to the state, but 45% come to the county. So we're going to see an increase of 10% statewide, with Lane County being the fourth largest county, and the number of hookups will see additional revenue. So thanks for bringing that up. That because the counties worked hard on that, and I remember myself and Alex, along with Commissioner Tucker from Lane County and Commissioner Labhart from Tillamook County, we were spent way too much time in Salem on that one, but I think it's paying off. So I think that's where that additional revenue may be coming from.
Just enough time, as it turns out.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Are there questions or comments? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve Order 16-03-15-08 in the matter of adopting the fiscal year 15-16 supplemental budget number 2.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes 5-0. Thank you, Judy. Item C is next. It's your report presenting the second quarterly fiscal year 15-16 financial report. We have both our administrator, Mr. Mokoheisky, and with us, I believe, is going to be John Mosby, our senior management analyst. Morning, John.
Mr. Chair, I'll, as John gets set up here, just make a couple comments. The first time that John has put together the quarterly financial report, and we'll be presenting it to you today. And as the board knows, we do these quarterly financial reports along with quarterly strategic planning updates to make sure that we are continually, we don't just talk about the budget in May for a few weeks with the Budget Committee, but we're continually integrating sound financial management practices throughout our organization, updating the board and the public and our employees on tracking of revenues and expenses in various funds. So providing a budget status and potential changes, opportunities for change, and just making sure that we have this ongoing dialogue. 3 things I'll just note for you that we're actively working on, and John will report to you, both local and national economic indicators are trending in a positive direction, and so you'll hear about the continued positive movement of our economy, which is certainly a good thing for our community. Internally, we, as the board knows, we approved a voluntary separation incentive program last year with 2 bargaining units that negotiated that with us, as well as for non-represented employees. We had 31 individuals apply. 28 of those 31 signed the actual agreements. 3 of those individuals, 3 of the 31 declined. So there are actually 28 approved VSIPs. The estimated savings in the first year across all funds is approximately $500,000. It's just the first year savings from that VSIP program. So, and we're working with departments. 22 of those 28, I believe, were in Public Works, because it was the 2 Public Works unions that worked with us to negotiate that. And so managing that from an operational standpoint has been critical. So we're thankful certainly for the savings, and we're managing the operational impacts. The other thing that we've implemented is a vacancy review committee process. So now any vacant position, this began in December of 2015, and it is continuing. We had a meeting yesterday, actually. Weekly we meet, and any vacant position that's open in any distressed fund, so the general fund, the road fund, the parks fund would be examples of distressed funds where there's fewer resources certainly than we need to provide the level of service that the public demands. We're requiring that any vacant positions that are funded but asking to be filled by the department go through this vacancy review and ultimately reviewed by Human Resources, the Budget Office, and then approved by me. So that's just, and I want to share that with the board. We've talked about it a little bit, but we will continue that effort to make sure that we're identifying all opportunities to reduce expenses and move forward appropriately with every position that we're seeking to fill. And finally, that we continue our aggressive efforts to manage our investments in health and wellness. We opened an employee health clinic in February. We've had great participation in that, and we have a goal of stabilizing and controlling our ongoing health insurance costs for employees, as well as improving health and wellness for all of our staff throughout Lane County. So just want to share a few of those updates on things that we're actively working on, and turn it over to John to go through the financial overview.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Chair Stewart and Commissioners. As Steve said, overall it's very positive.
You might just turn the mic just toward you.
How's that?
That's better.
Okay.
We'll make sure we hear you.
As Steve said, it's very positive overall economic news and fund news. We're having a little technical difficulties with the presentation, so I'm just going to go through it, and hopefully you have it in front of you. For our national economic indicators, the Consumer Price Index increased 0.7% for the year ending in December 2015, and that's nationally. For the Portland-Salem metropolitan area, it was a 1.3% increase in the first half of the year and a 1.1% increase in the second half of the year. National unemployment numbers are very positive. The unemployment rate has dropped to 5%. And that's down from 5.6% in the same period in the prior year. And we're about back to pre-recession levels of unemployment. For inflation, the inflation decreased 0.1% in December. And as I mentioned, the annual increase has been 0.7%. So overall, very positive national economic indicators. For health insurance costs, the CPI for medical care gained 1.2% in the second quarter of 2015. While health insurance also increased 2.2%. The annual increase in the CPI for health insurance was 3.8%, We would have seen a 4% increase here at Lane County, but that was mitigated by going self-funded, which you all know quite a bit about. Moving on to local economic indicators. Local employment data is also quite positive. Unemployment in Lane County was 6% in June of 2015, rose slightly in September of 2015 to 6.5%, and decreased to 5.6% in December. Unemployment statewide in Oregon was 6.2% in September and has decreased to 5.4% in December. As I mentioned, the national rates for the same period are 5.1% and 5% respectively. We're almost back to pre-recession levels for all industries except manufacturing in Lane County in terms of our jobs. The majority of losses that we haven't recovered are manufacturing. Some real estate statistics. The average home price in Lane County grew to $244,000 in January of 2016, and that's from $235,000 in January of 2015. This is a 3.5% increase. In the same comparison period, the median home price rose 4% from $212,000 to $220,000. So home prices have been increasing. Building permit activity has also increased in the second quarter of our fiscal year from October to December. We saw an increase of 17.7% in residential building permit activity. We also saw an increase of 1.4% in commercial activity. We attribute this large increase in residential permits just likely due to positive economic conditions. Moving on from economic data to fund information on the 5th page. Fund information is very positive. All our funds are positive and within budget. I'm going to go over just all funds and then look at the general fund and the road fund. For all our funds, revenue-wise, we've received 50.12% of anticipated revenue. We have received the majority of our property tax payments. Taxes and assessments, we've received 87.9% of anticipated revenue. We've only received 15% of federal revenue, though that's within expected amounts. It tends to come in later in the fiscal year. Looking at expenditures, we've expended 39.04% of our anticipated expenditures. And again, that's within expected amounts. That tends to fluctuate slightly due to vacancies. Moving on to the general fund. The general fund is positive and within budget. It's received 64.9% of its budgeted annual revenue. This is an increase of 0.43% over the same period last year. So just a slight increase over the same period last year, but overall where we would expect it to be. In terms of general fund expenditures, we are also positive and within budget. We've received 43.93%, we've expended 43.93% of our annual general fund operating expense budget. This is a slight decrease, 1% versus the same period last year, and was within expected amounts. The road fund, revenue is positive and within budget for the road fund. We've received 35.87% of our budgeted road fund operating revenue, which is a slight decrease over the same period last year, a decrease of 1.5%. The net decrease of $125,153 results for an ODOT fund exchange revenue that was not received in the second quarter. However, budgeted operating revenue is up by 3.2% for the fiscal year, and this is due to highway revenue sharing and grants. Finally, for road fund expenditures, we're positive and within budget. We've expended 47.6% of our annual road fund budgeted expenditures. This is an increase of 2.56% over the same period last year. And this is due to the overall road fund budget decreasing, so just proportionally it's gone up slightly. Thanks, Jeff. And that's the summary of the quarterly financial report. Open it up for any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Questions? Commissioner Bozovich?
So just getting back to some of the national and local indicators, it would be useful if we could either capture workforce participation or the U6 number. Pure unemployment doesn't quite tell the whole story. think that, there's the one graph where you're showing basically the recovery in job losses there. And I think part of that, the story of the reason why we're so close on our unemployment rate is actually our workforce participation rate has dropped, and that's accounting for a lot of that. We actually haven't recovered the total number of jobs lost, and either having that with the unemployment rate or a U6, which gets to total unemployment and underemployment, will better tell that story. The more recent data last month, we were down to 5% unemployment, and which is exactly where we were pre-recession. But I guarantee you, we don't have as many jobs in Lane County, yet our population's grown 1% a year since then. So there's more to that story than just unemployment. So if we could maybe, the administrator and you could work on maybe adding one more statistic in there, I'd appreciate that.
Absolutely. I will add that for next time.
Commissioner Lycan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I wanted to ask a question regarding the real estate statistics. And so I see that the permits have increased by 17.7%. Now, this is just in Lane County land management. That's correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay, so this does not include any cities, just within land management.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so do you have the actual number of permits? So the 17.7 increase that could be 12 compared to 10 last year.
Mm-hmm.
So if we could, if you might be able to find an actual number, I'd be curious on that. The other piece right now is that there's such little supply now in the real estate market, and in fact, people are now getting into bidding wars back in especially within the cities, and in particular. And we still are waiting for, what has it been, 8 years now, Envision Eugene? I'm looking at Pat, something like that. So we still have not seen Envision Eugene yet, and I believe that they're going to account for maybe some residential land. 2030 plan Springfield will not be accounting for residential. They're only going to focus on commercial industrial land, I think, expansion. But I'd be curious to see the actual number, because I think that's important to maybe get an understanding of where the increases are happening throughout Lane County. So if we could, that's my question, is so if we could get a number and not just the percentage, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, I do have that information, so I'd be happy to include that in future reports.
You can just send it to us via email if you'd like, the entire board, so we maybe have that. So that's great. Thank you very much.
Other questions? All right. Thank you, John.
Okay, thank you.
So next is item D. Again, it's a report. This time it's on the Lane County 2014 through 2017 quarterly strategic plan update. Again, we'll have lead off with Administrator Mokrzycki, and we're joined again with Judy Williams, our Budget and Strategic Planning Supervisor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a couple quick comments while Judy gets settled there. As the board knows, you developed a new strategic plan in late 2014. It was approved by the board in late 2014. In 2015, we updated the board in March, June, and December, and then we did an annual workshop with the board to revise and update and add new goals on December 8th. You approved that new set of goals on January 26th, and so we're here, and we'll continue these. We're always going to do quarterly strategic plan updates and annual workshops, work sessions with the board to update that. Again, I just want to reiterate it. Sometimes I feel like a broken record, but our strategic plan is our daily planning. It's not only thinking long-term over the next several years, but it's daily what we use to drive our actions. And I will just note that as the board is well aware, we're in the middle of budget process, and we deliver a proposed budget to the Budget Committee on May 3rd. What I have shared in all of our meetings with folks is we have a pretty clear guideline from the board on how we should be establishing that budget, and it's our strategic plan. So we are taking our strategic plan and linking it to the budget process, because the budget really, what the budget is a set of priorities. It establishes, it puts our money where our mouth is, right? the strategic plan is our mouth and the budget is our money. And so we're really making every effort to link together the strategic plan and the budget process and making sure that the budget reflects the priorities and goals established by the board. So I'll turn it over to Judy.
Thank you. So I have a few slides, like 8 or 9 or so, and you also have the information in your packet with a lot more detail. Excuse me. So I'll just cover a couple highlights and then open up if there's any questions. But as Administrator Mocher Heiskrian mentioned, there's been a lot of progress to date so far. So yes, we've accomplished at least 18 goals this last year. We're working on accomplishing more. We did add 32 additional goals during the last work session, as Administrator Mocher Heiskrian mentioned. And there's been just a lot of progress, a lot of work from our staff, and I just want to take a second to recognize all of their work. I bug them on a quarterly basis at least on getting status updates and reports from them, and it's been great working with everyone, and they fitted in their time to get information back to me, so I appreciate that. One thing that we did add that we were wanting to add last time was identifying leads for each of the goals. So as we walk through that, I have a couple examples on the screen of where we've added those to update our strategic plan packet. And again, this is in your information and on the website as well. So I just wanted to go through just a few of them. I won't go through every one of them. Priority number 1, the Safe and Healthy County. These are a couple of our additional new goals. So you see 1 and 2. We have a progress category and then the lead and the status category, as we've always had. So working hard on the proposed budget in order to meet our public safety services goal and come up with options with little budget reductions. And there's been a lot of progress on that. Just a couple others. One completed item from the last time we met is in regards to the Fern Ridge project, that there was a lot of effort, a lot of staff time, and a lot of coordinated efforts to work on this project. And after a public hearing February 9th, the board did decide not to place the measure on the ballot, but this was an item on our strategic plan, so that is a completed item, and more work will be done. As you see, number 4, we're going to continue working on public safety and possibly evaluate public surveys later on in this year. Another couple items under Safe and Healthy County are, we had a number, probably 8 or 9 additional adds to really kind of reducing recidivism. So a lot of work that's happening in both our youth and adult correction systems to really address reducing the recidivism. So I just have a couple of examples of those up here, and there's been just a number of partnerships, the Sheriff's Office, Parole and Probation, Health and Human Services, just really working together, often weekly meetings to collaborate and come up with a lot of new ideas, and working on jail diversion, jail intercept, behavioral health services ideas, Department of Corrections reentry program ideas, batterer intervention programs, pre-sentencing assessment, work on effective practices and community supervision, known as EPICS, and both the youth and adult parole and probation population have been co-training in this effort as well. So it's exciting to report a lot of progress happening on that front.
Judy, I think we need a battery change.
Oh, sorry. I'll just...
Those batteries may have exhausted their useful life. Maybe time for new ones.
Thank you.
Add to our strategic plan.
Good. Add that item. I think it's being worked on, the Harris Hall remodel. Briefly on the Safe and Healthy County, in the items in regards to the CHIP, there's just been, again, a lot of progress, and you've heard from Health and Human Services a number of times on the progress that they've had for the CHIP. So again, just highlighting a couple of these pieces. So improving community understanding of the impact of adverse childhood experiences. There's been so many presentations that Health and Human Services has done. Their media outreach campaign has been in progress. They've published many newsletters in their own department, as well as working with those outside their office in as much effort as they can to get this information out there. And then another bus advertising campaign is also happening this month in March. In terms of rural areas, as was mentioned, a positive note, as you know, the Oak Ridge Clinic did open and is currently seeing patients in Oak Ridge. So a great expansion of behavioral health services there. And again, lots of collaboration. So the Health and Human Services Commission, in partnership with HACSA, Poverty and Homelessness Board, and other community partners, one big progress to announce is the unveiling in January of the 404 veterans that were housed via Operation 365 for fiscal year 2000 or calendar year 2015. In the area of vibrant communities, there's been, again, a lot of work on the economic development front and also the land management front, working to complete commercial and industrial permits in a timely manner. So there's been a lot of reviews and efficiency work going on in land management, as well as a fee analysis. Lots of new hirings, the land management manager. They are struggling with one hiring of a senior plans examiner. They did hire one, but that's kind of the last step, and as soon as they get somebody on board, they'll really see a turn in that item. In the equity and access objective, there's again been a lot of progress, and it's been mentioned even this morning on the meeting that's happening tomorrow, and further updates coming back to the board in this spring. Identifying a task force was one of the last items, and they're going to be coming back to you soon to advise on the creation of this advisory body. And again, just promoting acceptance and understanding for all people based on the unique background, culture, and diversity of our employees and the people we serve. This goal item, there's been a lot of progress in working on equity summits this last year and working on future plans for 2016 as well. And a couple more slides. So infrastructure related, work on the facilities management plan. There's one item, again, there's been a lot of progress on several fronts, and this was just one to bring to your attention. So assessment and help identify and analyze needs. And I know the Lane Event Center is one of those that's kind of on the wait list of the next projects to get some assistance on, and just due to the capital projects that have taken place in the county, which is great news elsewhere, this has kind of been in holding pattern, so possibly looking at reallocating staff to get this done. A lot of work on the space programs concepts and completing a site suitability study for the new courthouse facility, so a lot of exciting work and progress happening on that front. And the parks, related to the Parks Master Plan, Parks is working on selecting a consultant to refine and finalize Parks Master Plan update, and you'll be getting an update by this next quarter from Parks. And finally, just a few items on the additional administrative infrastructure piece that we added this last time. A couple of examples that I'll point out. So we wanted to ensure greater efficiencies in training delivery by implementing a new learning management system. And as you likely know, this process, it's called LEAP, the learning, kind of stumble on that one, but it is the learning management software. Anyway, I've seen many emails on it, and it's been rolled out on LEAP Day. So a lot of progress happening on that front. Rolled out in February, so now the next step is working with departments to leverage the benefits of the system. So really looking at it and seeing how we can all utilize it fully. Invest in employee wellness while stabilizing health insurance costs. A great progress report. The Live Well Health Clinic opened in February, so great progress there. And a couple items related to quality performance and continuity of business operations. One is just enhancing the internal and external communication and engagement in our community and within our organization. The Our Lane employee newsletters have been very informative and a success, and I've heard from several employees that really enjoy reading what's happening each month. There's a key communicator network that was established, as well as a new website that is set to launch in the summer, possibly June of 2016. And in terms of performance audits, there's a couple of audits to note. The financial indicators and audit is on track, and it should be completed in the end of this month in March, and you will be hearing from the performance auditor likely this April. And a behavioral health audit is also beginning, so likely summer, August, you'll be seeing that completed audit take place. And just a quick summary on some of the next steps. It was continuing reporting on all of the progress and updating you and the community on all of the progress, updating the website of all our accomplishments and the continued action plans, and also working in measurable outcomes in likely the next couple of reports. So with that, that's what I have, unless you have any questions, but thanks for the opportunity to talk about it.
Okay. Commissioner Bozovich?
Thank you. I just want to highlight one item, which was action item number 6, which is about the Justice Reinvestment Act. Mm-hmm. And just note that the collaborative work of the Public Safety Coordinating Council and the partners involved in that, former Chair Tim Lowy and current Chair Paul Solomon did great work, and the Chair of the Budget Committee, Judge Vogt, did a lot of work this last summer to fix and amend the budget based on the actual allocation of state dollars, allocate all that, and then I have to really give commendations to Susan Sowards at LCOG, the staff member. She prepared and submitted our grant applications in the first early cycle, which very few counties got in on, and did such a great job that we got approval of all of our grants early enough that we were actually able to start implementing the programs much sooner. And it was that real collaborative work over the summer to, fix, amend, and of course the board putting it on our agenda in short notice a couple times, just to stay ahead so we could make that first cycle and get those approvals early. Otherwise, there was a full quarter wait to find out whether you were actually going to get approved for the programs you were, the money you were allocated. So we could actually start doing that work much sooner and knowing we could move ahead positively. And that was just an amazing effort, great partnership. There's a lot of folks involved in the PSCC, and the staff from LCOG did a great job. And it's just one of those things where everything came together, and we're doing some great work trying to reduce recidivism and get good active treatment to these folks that have criminogenic behaviors in our community, and try and get those things cured that actually drive those behaviors. So it just was a great piece of collaborative work between multiple agencies to get that done.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Commissioner Farr?
Thank you. Thank you, Judy. Great presentation. You just barely scratched the surface of the content that is in the presentation in front of us right now. And Mr. Mokrajewski, you say you sound like a broken record. I would like to suggest that this broken record is like music to my ears, because looking at all of the things that we're moving forward on, in the light of the limited budget and the budget constraints that we're under, it's remarkable how many things we are moving forward. And the fact that we have a strategic plan, which is one of the very first things that you did as a county administrator, is make certain that the staff got together with the board and we produced a strategic plan that everybody knows what page we're on at all times during the work day, during the work week, and tremendous progress along a broad number of fronts, which is not possible without having things itemized under strategies, tactics, and goals, and moving forward. Thank you for the quarterly report. A couple of things I'd like to point out. One of the things that you state under item 1.1 is to identify options to stabilize and reduce expenses and enhance revenues in the general fund. That's important that we talk about that, not ad nauseum right here, but that is one of the things that overarches everything that we're doing, is making certain that that happens. But a couple of real highlights under public safety: continue programs such as the 416 program, cognitive behavioral therapy, and the jail diversion and intercept program. Finding ways once again to use our limited resources to make certain that the people who need a certain kind of treatment, as opposed to incarceration, as opposed to what has been more traditional or more heavily used treatment, we're moving forward very rapidly with addressing behavioral health issues and behavioral health needs in this county. And as you know, the entire board has a keen focus on behavioral health at this point in time. It is one of the high items on our agenda in terms of identifying ways to use our resources to address behavioral health issues, which ultimately free up resources elsewhere. And as a nice side effect, it really has a beneficial, a distinct, remarkable beneficial effect on the people who are engaged in the programs. And implementing the Community Health Improvement Plan, the CHIP, the progress that we're making on that is just remarkable. On a daily basis, I see over in Health and Human Services the progress that's being made. But as I look at every agenda item, I notice that there is a health implication on every agenda item. And so each time a staff member prepares, or a staff group prepares an item for a board agenda, there's always a health implication on there. That makes sure that health and health-related issues are at the forefront of our minds at all times. I love seeing that. Sometimes it says there is no health implication. Quite often it does. But the thought goes into preparing that particular part of the agenda item. And then I'd like to very quickly, Objective 2.1, invest in a strong, diverse, and a sustainable regional economy. Without that, most things fail. Without a strong, diverse, sustainable regional economy, most things fail. And I look at all the different points underneath that, and I see Mr. McFadden still sitting here. One of the points under there is continued development of a rural economic development program to assist rural Lane County communities with economic development needs. So we are moving forward in many different fronts, and I see that Sarah Case's name is right beside right on the what is that column called?
The lead column.
Lead column, thank you. And I'd like to commend Ms. Case. I don't know if she's watching or listening right now, for the work that she does in light of the recent retirement of Glenda Poling. And as a team, they did superb work in moving and building a foundation for what I believe is going to be a strong economic tower in Lane County, based upon the fact that it is called out as one of our main strategic priorities. Thank you very much, Judy. Good presentation.
Mr. Mokowski.
Mr. Chair, I just want to make a comment about behavioral health, mental health services, particularly in the areas of corrections, and ask you to flag that point, and let's come back to it on May 3rd when we talk about the budget. In particular, we're spending a lot of time right now looking at ways in which we can meet the needs of individuals that are in our corrections system with mental health. If you tour the jail and you talk to our deputies and the captain in the jail, they'll be the first ones to tell you that the jail is not the right place to deal with individuals that have acute mental health issues. I read recently, Mr. Kyler gave me an article that was written by Richard Sherman in, I believe it was 2002. And really, everyone is familiar with Richard Sherman, I believe, and it's really an interesting article. I'm happy to share it with the board. In that, he talks about, so this is about 14 years ago, he talks about that the estimate of individuals in the adult corrections facility in our jail with mental health issues is about 30%. If you talk to Sheriff Trapp today, they'll tell you that at least 60%, the estimate is about 60% of individuals in our adult corrections facility in the jail have mental health issues. So We're seeing this in our community health centers outside the corrections system. If you talk to our physicians, Dr. Ludke, Dr. Kincaid, and our providers in our community health centers, and if you talk to private providers and private clinics locally, they'll tell you on average 70 to 80% of individuals that are coming in to our clinics and to private clinics have mental health issues. So it's a community-wide issue, and as it relates to our role in running a corrections system, we're looking closely at that. At the same time that we have budget challenges and structural adjustments we need to make to our revenues and expenses in the general fund, we also need to make sure that we're following the board's priorities and investing in areas that meet community needs and ensure public safety. So thank you for that point and the opportunity to respond to it. And I just ask that we have the opportunity to come back and talk in more detail about how we can accomplish and improve in those areas as part of our budget for next year.
Thank you, Steve.
Great. Commissioner Lycan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Judy, thank you for the update. Really appreciate it. I'd like to go to under Priority 3 Infrastructure and Action item 56. And maybe, Steve, this is maybe for you. Explore a countywide effort for succession planning, career development opportunities, and leadership programs. And it has fall of 2016. Right now it's under monitoring, but given the fact that in Public Works, the top 2 people now are retiring or moving to another organization. Can you maybe provide a quick update on this piece? Because I think this is very important. I think it's important to make sure that we have folks in place who will, especially with our departments. I mean, every one of our departments is key. And so maybe if you can maybe just comment on this real quickly, because I know it's fall 2016, but with Howard leaving, I mean, now all of a sudden that just like, whoa, and kind of caught my eye. So maybe a quick update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Lycan. Great question. And so I'll touch on Public Works briefly and then talk organizationally some things that we're looking at doing around succession planning. In Public Works, you're right. We've had a little bit of a perfect storm. Ms. Miller has announced her retirement. Her last day will be May 27th, I believe. Mr. Schuessler, as I mentioned last week at the board meeting, has accepted a position with LCOG. We recently, Bill Morgan, our county engineer, moved to Montana. The office manager, Christy Meyer, who was outstanding. Her husband took a job in Bend. There's a management analyst or a program coordinator position in Parks, Mr. Stockdale, who accepted a position in Washington State, and then you have 22 VSIPs that were accepted in Public Works. So a lot of transition that's happening there. At the same time, I'd note, you look at the division managers in Public Works between Dan Hurley and Orrin Schumacher, who was recently appointed the roads manager, Lydia McKinney, who transitioned over from engineering to be our new land management division manager, Corey Buller, who's now been in Lane Event Center for a while, Mike Russell, who's been in Parks for a while. We've got a really strong management team there and folks who've been groomed through the organization. So that is succession planning. Is ideally what you do is you create talent within your organization that is ready to take on additional responsibility when opportunities open up. And if you can't, then you go out and recruit. So we are looking at an interim, we'd like to bring someone in on a career development on an interim basis for the assistant director position, which really focuses a lot on personnel, human resource, labor negotiations, budget, administrative type work. So we're working on that, having conversations on identifying an individual in the organization that could do that on an interim basis. We're beginning the recruitment for the director position with the goal of filling the position by June. It's got a tight timeline. We're going to do a national search, competitive national search, and a number of rounds of interviews there. We're targeting a diverse pool of applicants. We brought over for the county engineer position an individual on an interim basis from the city of Eugene. That position is open for recruitment. I actually believe, I'm not sure if it closed or is recently closing. So we're actively working on all these fronts to either do career development opportunities, interim positions, or recruit for those roles, and we're aware of that. I would also note then, if you look at our other departments, youth services, you're aware that John Aarons and Al Levine both retired in Health and Human Services. Youth services, one of I believe the largest division one of the largest divisions, if not in Health and Human Services, both retired. We did national recruitment, had an outstanding pool of applicants, and we hired Kathleen Frenner, who is a supervisor in family mediation. So within our organization, so to me, again, that's what succession planning is. We create frameworks. Judy mentioned, I'll just wrap up here and say, Judy mentioned that our outstanding work that Aaron Rollins and our Human Resource Department have done and launching the new learning management program to make sure that we have standardized and customized training for all employees throughout the organization. We're talking with our director leadership team on establishing at least a once a year, possibly twice a year, supervisors and managers training. So we bring all supervisors and managers throughout the organization together for an all-day training session on setting goals and doing career development and networking throughout the organization. So these are all things that we're working on doing to make sure that we have a culture of leadership in the organization and that we're investing in ongoing training and development of our employees and moving people through the organization as much as possible. So happy to update more on details on that, but we are working actively and aggressively on all those fronts.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Others? Commissioner Farr?
It's really refreshing to hear you talk about succession planning, particularly developing and promoting from within. And I'd like to bring up a case in point. Christy Myers is leaving, and Christy and her husband are moving to Bend. Her husband is Nate Meyer. I hired Nate Meyer as a part-time seasonal help at Jerry's when he was 17 years old. Nate progressed through the ranks to be the store manager of the Eugene store and the Springfield store of Jerry's, through the ranks to be the head of stores which employ 350 plus people. So that's the benefit of promoting from within the ranks. Very successful in his work. Unfortunately, he had to take Christy with him when he transferred to Bend, and that's a loss to our organization because Christy did a superb job as office manager over in Public Works. But that is really the benefit of promoting from within. You really get the advantages of having people who are acclimated to the organization and to the community. It's always, as you mentioned, I agree with you, it's always best to find ways to promote from within. Certainly sometimes you need education or certification that is not available from within, and you need to look outside. But whenever you have an opportunity and you find a way to fill the ranks from within, we have a history of success in that area. Thank you, Ms. Mokrzycki.
Others? Okay. Thank you, Judy, for that report. All right, so item 6 is 6E now is a report. It's a legislative update. We'll have with us Alex Kyler, our Intergovernmental Relations Manager. It's kind of a wrap-up or a report on the short legislative session.
Well, Mr. Kyler gets settled. Let me just make a quick acknowledgement and thank you for the great work that he did in this short session, and you're going to hear the work here, but really delivering on some priorities that the board had established, particularly around identifying and securing funding for our courthouse design and construction project.
Good morning, Commissioners, Mr. Chair, Board. I'm Alex Kyler, your Intergovernmental Relations Manager, and as Mr. Mokrzycki indicated, here to give you a wrap-up and a report back on the 2016 short session. I think the key material to refer to is Attachment A in the packet, where I provided an overview of the bills that I tracked during the session, and I'd like to discuss those briefly with you and then entertain any questions that you may have. I meant to bring how many bills were introduced during the short session, and I know I've seen it, but I'm sorry I don't have it. But at any rate, this short session, I think the news
on it did it justice. It was not only a contentious session, but there were a lot of bills that were introduced. So the volume was great, and the magnitude of several of those bills was really pretty substantial. So there was a lot of acrimony in Salem. We tried to focus primarily on the courthouse funding issue. As you recall, we went through a process with both the Association of Oregon Counties and the Oregon Judicial Department. That's a collaboration of those two entities, whereby the Chief Justice is trying to establish a process to phase and present to the legislature an orderly way to address courthouse deficiencies statewide. The big project in the state is the Multnomah County Courthouse. Their project was advanced during that process, as were 3 other projects, including the Lane County project, which amongst the 4 projects identified by the Chief Justice as a priority for 2015, our project was really the least amount of money and somewhat different in that we were asking for just money to address the planning phase of our courthouse project. We felt good in the 2015 session that was going to advance. And then somewhere between, we'd had 2 hearings on the courthouse projects in Ways and Means, and somewhere between the last hearing and the adoption of the lottery bonding bill, our project dropped off the list. So it seemed appropriate to go back in the short session to try to make sure that it would be on the list, especially because the way the bond sale works, and this funding comes from bond sales, is that bond sale does not take place until typically spring of 2017. So the legislature purposely pushes that bond sale to the very end of the biennium in order to capture the expenses in the next biennium. So we went to work really during the interim. Several of you attended, where we did a courthouse tour and briefing for our local delegation, and I think we did, frankly, a much better job probably of teeing up the project than we had done prior to the 15 session. We were able to get some advocacy to, I think, the proper people in Salem, and while there were some hiccups along the way during the short session where I was feeling not too confident, ultimately we did get an invite to come present to Capital Construction Committee, which was the Ways and Means subcommittee that was hearing these kinds of projects. Chairman Stewart came up and testified at that hearing, had to do some speed reading pretty much to get his testimony into the record, as the chair was only allowing 2 minutes of testimony per person. But it worked, and we were able to find language in a couple different bills by the end of session. So there was a budget rebalance bill that had to make adjustments for the Oregon Judicial Department to take on the added dollars, and then there was the authorizing language in what's called the lottery bonding bill, which provides, the lottery bonding bill that provides the language to actually sell the bond. So that in this packet on attachment A, you've got the issue in that first bill, the rebalance bill, which is Senate Bill 501. I want to clarify, because Senate Bill 501 does have a section in it about the Lane County Courthouse, and it's a little bit confusing because it speaks to $2.8 million of other funds authority for the Lane County Courthouse. And the reason is that the actual bond authorization is for $1.4 million. But under statute, the requirement for counties is that we must match whatever the state's investment is. And so what the language actually speaks to depositing money from the county into a state fund. And thus, the state had to make an allocation for the county's money as well. And so the bill reads $2.8 million of other fund spending limit. It's actually, if you go to the lottery bonding bill, it's $1.4 million of authorization. But I think it brings up a point that that I think I'm not exactly sure, frankly, where this decision will be made, but we will have to put $1.4 million ultimately into this state fund. The sale does not occur until March, April of 2017, but we could put money into that state fund before that. And so the question becomes if there's any functionality to put money in over, even within this budget year or next budget year or the following budget year to gain that $1.4 million of match money. Or does it make sense just to put it all in there in one fell swoop? The state, from our understanding, pretty much anything prior 65 days, within a 65 day of the bill being signed, is fair game for matching fund purposes. So we have not incurred an invoice, for example, for any of the work done on the courthouse project. So the good news is that we are not, anything that we will spend moving forward will be considered match by the state of Oregon. So that's good news. There's still, I think, an awful lot of earliness in this process. So one of the nice things is we're getting some feedback from a couple of the other counties who are a little bit further in front of us. Jefferson County is got a courthouse that's just about complete. Multnomah County is into really their design stage. They've they've got property that they've purchased. So these two counties are in front of us, and I think we've got some good learning from them to take advantage of. And we're continuing to see this project, this entire project evolve. There was a meeting yesterday at the Association of Oregon Counties in response to, in particular, the work that was done during the short session, because one of the things in the budget bill is a budget note to the Department of Justice, the Judicial Department, the Oregon Judicial Department. And it directs the Chief Justice to come back to the Emergency Board in December of 2016 with a plan, a 12-year plan, for how the Chief Justice is going to prioritize projects and try to smooth out the funding needs. I think there was, as we went around and talked to different legislators during the session, there was concern, obviously, for this very large ask that will be coming from Multnomah County next biennium. And then, what the legislature would rather not see is peaks and valleys as it moves forward. So how can the Chief Justice try to smooth that curve and really give the legislature some degree of consistency from biennium to biennium for courthouse investments? So the Chief Justice does have some work to do to prepare for that, and they have been in correspondence with us about what we expect to be incurring cost-wise over the next several biennium, because obviously they've got to come up with a 12-year plan now for the legislature. So all in all, it was a good session for courthouse funding, and unless, Mr. Chair, you'd like to ask some specific questions about that, I'll jump into these other issues.
I've seen any. Great. Thanks.
Okay.
Excuse me.
On the courthouse, so basically, the legislation allows us or requires us to put in $1.4 million into a state fund. That state fund then is there and available for us to be the match to state funding. And then there's a list, and the Chief Justice will, I hate to sound like Santa Claus here, but checking that list and checking it twice, and then eventually a decision will be made about whether we get to match or not. That
Let me
summary?
clarify. Chairman Stewart, Commissioner Sorensen. So the way we will enter into a contract with the Judicial Department. So the Judicial Department will want to know what will be the outcome that Lane County is providing as a result of this $2.8 million project. That's how they did it with Multnomah County, is that they wanted to know what would be, and in the phase that Multnomah County has already gone through, that contract addressed things like you'll create a design, you'll create engineering specifications, those kinds of things. You'll have a site.
So the naughty and nice clause.
We will do that with our money, or we will do that with our money that's in their hands?
We will do that with the entirety of the $2.8 million project.
After the match is made.
Right. So as soon as we could put in, the nice thing about putting the money into the state fund is there's no question that any withdrawals from that fund will be considered a match. But, and they are setting up that state fund for us to deposit into, I believe, as we speak. There is no requirement that we wait to make withdrawals from that fund before the state puts their dollars in, which won't come until March or April of 2017. So the presence of the fund is a function of statute, but what's most important, I think, is as this contract gets developed for the project, to make sure that we've got everything in there that we need. And I think, as I said, having seen some of the experiences of these two other counties that have gone through the process, we've got some good indicators already of what to make sure we look for in that contract.
Well, with the crystal ball that you possess, when will we start the process of actually designing this and working with the courts for what this facility would look like?
Chairman Stewart and Commissioner Sorensen, we've already been working for, I think about the last 6 to 9 months with the National Center for State Courts. So they've done some what they call blocking exercises to look at essentially the services of the court, the population here, to really try to get a sense of the demands that are placed upon the court. And from that knowledge, they're able to tell us in a modern courthouse what sort of square footage is necessary. And from that work, then we will begin to have discussions about design. I think those, if I had a crystal ball, I'd say you'd probably see some preliminary design work in 12 to 18 months from now.
Okay. When will the public be
we have none
involved?
of that.
When will the public be involved in the giving comments about what they think a good design would be and what they are concerned about for the design? It seems like we're involving the public a little later in the process, and then they'll say, you didn't involve us early enough.
Right. Well, Mr. Chairman Stewart and Commissioner Sorensen, I would really, I think I'd recommend that you probably might want to have your capital projects manager, our capital projects manager, come and speak to the process. At least in my conversations as we've gone through this, I think there's an enormous amount of recognition of involving the public very early on as we get into this. We had been really reluctant to do a whole lot with the public given the uncertainty of the funding. Now that is, the ink is barely dry on that, I think the plan will become more transparent here, but like I said, in discussions with the capital projects manager, he's well aware of the importance of really getting people involved in this process very early on.
One thing I might add is sitting on the facilities committee with Commissioner Bozovich, we had this discussion this last week, I believe. And there's going to be a decision point probably coming before the board fairly soon, because one of the reasons that we did engage with this firm to see what the courthouse needs was to help us answer the question about location of the courthouse. So I believe that there's going to be fairly soon, in the next few months, a report to us and probably engage the board and the public in that conversation well before the courthouse designs take place. So that'll be, in my mind, kind of the first steps of introducing it to the public.
Who do you think is the most logical person to receive public comment about the design and the how the new courthouse would look? Who do you think is the best person? The facilities manager, or?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I would say our capital projects manager, Mr. Craner, really is leading both the feasibility study that we've done with the National Center for State Courts, as well as any design work that we do. So he's the right individual. I mean, ultimately, the board needs to hear that feedback from people. And I would just second what Commissioner Stewart said, that really what has to come before any detailed work related to design, there needs to be some decision, or some decision points at least, around the location of the facility. Once that is in there, there are complicated factors involved with that decision. So that discussion needs to happen, and the board needs to provide some direction, and potentially other parties need to be involved in that decision around the right location. And then we'll begin the more detailed design work, which will include significant public engagement and feedback.
And I would add that when you're talking about who to send information to, probably the most important partner that we have is with the courts. So I would recommend that Ms. Rambo be copied on all correspondence that we receive, so that the courts are aware of the comments that we're doing, or that we're receiving. So, okay.
All right, so moving into the other bills, the first one that I've got listed is, I think, related to the courthouse, really, which is a bill that was championed by Multnomah County to create a new stream of revenue to help assist counties in paying for these courthouse replacement costs. So House Bill 4093 did pass, and it does require some additional work to be implemented, but essentially the process laid out in House Bill 4093 is that the Chief Justice may bring to you a recommendation for adoption of an ordinance that would allow for an additional surcharge to be placed on the bill reads both traffic and parking fines that are processed through the circuit court. Now, the Multnomah County is the only county that actually does parking fines through their circuit court. Lane County's circuit court does do traffic violations. This is not a huge revenue source for Lane County. We estimate about $25,000 a year would come from a traffic violation surcharge, which under the bill cannot be greater than $5. So if it were at $5, the bill would raise about $25,000 a year. So that's a future decision point for the board as well. My recommendation would be on any of these things where there's a future decision point, we probably run this through the legislative committee first. Have a discussion there before bringing something like that to the board.
Or possibly the Finance and Audit Committee too.
Finance and Audit, yes, sir. I will say that 4093 is not a bill that applies statewide. It is a bill that applies only to those counties that have received bonding authority. So we lobbied the bill somewhat because we were certainly trying to gain that bonding authority. There's a suite of bills on affordable housing that passed there were a package of 4 bills that I've outlined in Attachment A, and I think one of the decision points again is that a significant piece of legislation was Senate Bill 1533, which lifted the exemption language that had existed where local governments could not implement construction excise taxes. So the bill provides for that now, and there is a question whether the county would want to undertake a construction excise tax ordinance. The next bill that I highlighted was Senate Bill 1559, tobacco product retail licensure. This was a bill that was sort of an interesting bill to watch. It made it all the way to the Senate floor, and for those of you who watched the Senate goings on closely, you knew that really towards the very end of session there was sort of a watershed moment when the Senate as a body agreed to adopt a rule that allowed them to not read the bill in its entirety. And as a result of that, the precursor to that change was that there was an agreement to send several bills back to committee. And conveniently, that committee was already closed down, so the bills that were sent back to committee died. And Senate Bill 1559 was one of those bills. It was a bill that we were watching pretty closely because it did, in a way, mirror what this board has already done with respect to tobacco licensure, and it would have preempted that work. So we were watching it fairly closely. There was the other, Multnomah County was also watching it fairly closely. They also have a retail licensure framework, and their position on the bill was they'd prefer to see a statewide application of tobacco licensure rather than county by county, and so they were supporting the measure. There was quite a bit of work done by the tobacco lobby on the bill. There was a lot of questions about whether or how a license might be transferred to a new owner if the geographic location of a store had been moved to be within 1,000 feet of a school. So there was some question about that really arose very late in the session at Ways and Means, and I think sort of served to cause the bill to be very troublesome as it hit the Senate floor. My expectation is that bill will come back in 2017. The next bill I have is Senate Bill 1532, which is the minimum wage increase. I think there were some comments earlier today even about this measure. There is 3 tiers of implementation around the state. There was a lot of work by Lynn County in particular to suggest that this is an unfunded mandate, and we've seen, and I think the board now has 2 separate legal opinions on whether or not the implementation of a minimum wage bill is or is not an unfunded mandate. So I think it's a little too early to tell how this will all evolve, but on the record, Lynn County did suggest that if the bill were passed, that they would not implement it. And so I'm just not exactly sure what will happen, but we do have these 2 competing legal opinions on that measure. The next bill I've got is the transient lodging tax, House Bill 4146. This bill did pass. It was modified fairly substantially over its introduced version, and then again after it passed the House, the Senate amended it a little bit as well. Essentially, what it does, prior to session there was a statewide transient lodging tax of 1%, and as a result of the bill, there is now a transient lodging tax of 1.8%, which will last for 4 years before it will revert down to 1.5%. And the resultant revenue will be handled a little bit differently than previous. There will be a competitive grant program available for projects to apply for this new revenue over the next, as the bill now moves forward. The next bill I've got here is HJR 202, which is a constitutional amendment referral by the legislature. So we will be voting on, voters will see November 2016, a measure that asks if they want to approve 1.5% of net proceeds from the Oregon Lottery to go into a Veteran Services Fund. And I note that, among other things, that Veteran Services Fund could be used for county veteran services officers. Senate Bill 1565 is the next bill that I touch on. It's for an industrial improvements property tax exemption. This bill was the topic of an editorial in last week's Register Guard, where there were some, it's essentially like an enterprise zone for smaller cities and rural communities. Pretty interesting measure. It does allow for a 100% tax exemption for 3 out of 5 years, and does require concurrence from the taxing districts, or at least a majority of the taxing districts, before it's implemented. So this is another one where the county would need to write an ordinance before this goes into effect. And there's, just like an enterprise zone, the bill does require that there are certain standards that a company must meet before realizing the benefits of the tax exemption. Probably a good bill. I think, Chairman Stewart, you did written me an email saying, might this be a good thing for Goshen? This probably would be very applicable to our work in Goshen, and I think economic development staff is looking at it right now. There had been some contemplation of extending the Springfield Enterprise Zone down to Goshen, and this may be perhaps a cleaner way to do that. I'm just not sure, but they've got that in their hands. Another bill that I flagged is House Bill 4056. It did not pass, but it generated quite a bit of conversation among staff very early in the session. Essentially, what this is trying to figure out a good way to share data, especially GIS data. So between local government and state government, there just seems to be a lot of, there were some examples given during testimony on this bill where the state put up maps that it had produced for where, for example, recreational marijuana is sold, where they'd received licenses, and where schools are located, and drew circles around those recreational marijuana stores of 1,000 feet and showed them in relation to stores. And that's, I think it was just a good example of what the bill was trying to accomplish, is a way to accumulate data so that decision makers at all levels really have some good visual information about how their future decisions may impact other things that normally wouldn't be thought about. So we're going to keep our eye on that, because it does seem to have some interest, a lot of questions about how to best integrate data given the variety of different IT capability around the state. The next bill I've got is SJR 201, property tax reform. This one would have eliminated the Measure 50 limits. Was
Alex?
Yeah.
We do have an 11 o'clock time certain.
Oh.
I don't know if you kind of want to quickly go through the rest of these, as I'm sure there's a few questions here that are...
Sure. All right. Well, I'm going to skip then to the last one on the bill list, lottery allocations, because I think that was a very important, there's a piece in here that I wanted you to be aware of, which is each year the states, with a short session now, the idea is that the state does rebalance its budget. It looks at the February forecast. Rather than when the budget is created during the normal session, it looks at the close of session forecast to make its prognostications with respect to the biennium. The adjustments are made based on the February forecast, and in this case there was additional dollars. What AOC, the Association of Oregon Counties, suggested was that the legislature also apply that prognostication to its allocation of video lottery dollars to the state, to the counties, which is 2.5% of video lottery dollars come to the counties. If they had done that during this session, it would have resulted in $1.8 million of additional revenue to counties. And so I thought it was a very interesting sort of policy and fiscal question. And in the Ways and Means Committee, the co-chair suggested that his feeling was that it would be better to actually handle that in the next rebalance, which comes at the beginning of the 17 session. So they go back and do one last look at the budget and make a rebalance bill. So if lottery revenues have proven to be up during the previous biennium, the sense that we got was that the state will make an adjustment to counties based on that lottery revenue and give us a new check to make up for that difference. So it's a nice piece. I think what I wanted to make clear was that while the bill passed, the amendment put forward by the Association of Oregon Counties did not pass. So as I reread this, I was wanting to make sure you weren't thinking we were going to get additional video lottery dollars right now as a result of House Bill 5201. Their amendment did not pass, but we got some good commitment for future work. The other thing that I did for the board was give a little bit of a sense of where the budget rebalance did also impact the county, and so I've got a list of issues there. I did hear Commissioner Bozovich talk about justice reinvestment earlier today. The good news, Commissioner Bozovich, is that the state did make additional investments in Department of Corrections. The sort of raid that we'd expected on the JRI funds will not happen as a result, so that was positive. And then finally, Mr. Chair, there was a bill that I did not include that I should have, that the assessor alerted me to this morning, and I'd known about, but I didn't know that there was a county action. Senate Bill 1513. Senate Bill 1513 creates a property tax exemption for the surviving spouse of an emergency service provider killed in line of duty. It does require, however, that the county adopt an ordinance to allow that. And so that's another future decision-making point that the board may want to take up. It's a sort of a limited property tax exemption, but a lot of emotion around that particular bill, and the assessor reminded me of it this morning.
Thank you, Phil. Commissioner Lycan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So on a bill that wasn't mentioned was House Bill 4036, also known as the clean to coal or coal to clean. But one thing that I wanted to mention, and I thought this was important, is AOC worked directly with the chairman of the Senate on the Senate side, Senator Beyer. And what we did add was an amendment to require 8% of renewables come from small-scale community-based projects. In other words, biomass was added into and actually passed, which I think will be a significant benefit to rural. So as Mike was mentioning about rural Oregon and the issues, this is to me this was a big deal and added into it. So I really want to thank Senator Beyer on that. The other thing is, yesterday at the Legislative Committee, Commissioner Lindsay made it very well known that the Lynn County is moving forward on not only the class action suit regarding the forest trust lands and against the state, but they are moving forward on suing the state is under the unfunded mandate provision on minimum wage. And I'm not asking for Steve to come forward. He sent us an email from an opinion from their legal counsel, but I think at the end of the meeting when we asked for things to be added to the agenda, I think this might be worth at least having more of a conversation with the board on what potential, if we want to even get involved in that, and I have no idea. So I don't think that's an executive session. The Forest Trust is executive session today.
Today, correct.
Yeah, so that's something we may want to explore and just to find out a little bit more about that at a later date. But I just want to make note of the piece that Senator Byer did add into 4036. While it was controversial, the bill, that amendment I think is a plus, in particular for rural Lane County, but I think rural Oregon as a whole. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions, comments? Okay, so the only thing that I kind of honed in on was that it sounds like there might be a couple ordinances that need to be produced for us to match the state law. So does that need to be a board work item, or is that just a staff work item?
Chairman Stewart, I think that I didn't contemplate a motion to be accompanying this. There are definitely several different bills that pass that have these ordinances attached to it. I guess it would become an item for a subcommittee to take a look at and make a recommendation to the board. So either legislative committee or finance and audit, as you indicated, to do a follow-up on the...
Well, it sounds like maybe we ought to have this on the work plan for legislative to look at the requirements the state laws pass and what the county needs to do, and we can make a recommendation to the board as to what actions need to take place.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I just mention one thing very briefly? This is a memorandum, or a memorial, excuse me. The bill you mentioned regarding the Oregon Lottery and the veterans, the money that would be forwarded to the veterans, or that would be provided to the veterans. As that bill was going through the House and the Senate, one of the ultimate proponents of the bill, Senator Brian Bolquist's son, committed suicide. He was a Navy veteran, and that ended up being tragically a part of the discussion that went into the passage of that bill. And I'd like to pass along regards to Senator Brian and Peggy Bolquist on the passing of their son. Tragic event that happened during the Senate session, during this short session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kyler. So we have Mr. Dingle with us. Do you have any announcements for the board today? Okay. So we have 5 minutes before our time certain. We want to take a quick little 5-minute break.
Yeah, I'll get some water.
Okay, let's just go ahead and recess for 5 minutes and get us going at 11 o'clock. Okay, so I'd like to reconvene the Board of Commissioners from our little short 5-minute recess. We do have, we're working on item 7B, which is Order 16-03-15-09. It's in the matter of purchasing national flood insurance coverage for county-owned properties located in the flood zone A and delegating authority to the risk manager to sign the application documents. We have with us Lisa Lacey, who is our risk manager, and we have Ron Graybell from Brown & Brown Northwest. Welcome.
We're here today just as a follow-up to the meeting we had in September where we talked about earthquake and flood coverage.
Lisa, your mic's not picking you up.
It's working.
We're closer then.
Yeah.
Back in September, you deemed that the earthquake insurance coverage was adequate, but wasn't full for the flood. So we have 5 properties that do not currently have the excess coverage, and Ron's going to that with us.
This should be pretty quick and easy. Hopefully, thank you for having me today.
Thanks for coming.
So, at least in the next slide, if you wouldn't mind. So, as a real quick coverage of the flood insurance currently in place. You currently have, and we're really talking about flood zone A, within the 100-year floodplain. Travelers as your carrier, you have a $5 million limit for flood zone A. You can see higher limits for BX and X500. So next slide. And the reason why we only bought 5 is that the cost in the commercial insurance marketplace to buy more than 5, to buy $5 million on top of $5 million, to give you 10, is from $15,000 to $20,000 per million. Very expensive. So we're able to get 5. You can buy more, but it's awfully costly. So within that Travelers program structure, they impose a $500,000 deductible for both building and contents. So that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about buying federally subsidized coverage for the deductibles on the Travelers program. Okay?
Okay.
Questions? Pretty straightforward. Okay. So, I mean, back to Lisa's
Thanks for
report.
coming.
Just keeping it simple as we can here. So page 3 of 4 in the document in front of you from Lisa has your options, the different deductible levels. Really, it's deductible for the deductible, right? For the $500,000 in building, $500,000 in contents. The 2 options in table 1 and 2 are shown before you. It's all very inexpensive insurance as compared to the commercial insurance marketplace. I would recommend that you buy it because you can buy it.
Right. And I would say to the board, although that was short, you're hearing a condensed version of a rather long meeting that we had, that staff had, and that just so that you understand this is all part of an overall look with the risk manager. We looked at we're looking at FEMA and how all of this fits together. This is not just this is not a standalone piece. We're looking at our risk and our profile and how we can reduce costs in a comprehensive way, and that includes looking at what's available through FEMA, what we have to cover with insurance, and other things. So I just want to make sure you understand that. It was very quick, but this was, trust me, it was a much longer meeting to get to this point.
Thank you. Hopefully I didn't simplify it, shorten it too much. There was a pretty large report that we did for quake and flood with floodplain map overlays of all your locations to make sure we have the right flood zones, to make sure we qualify for FEMA, elevation certificates. It was a long process, and Lisa did a lot of work on the process. So.
Okay. Questions, commissioners?
Just a question. Mr. McRice, we talk often about the former National Guard Armory building. That's not covered in any way, is that? It's not listed on the list.
I'll have to look.
It's in the flood.
I don't think it's one of the properties we're talking about here. So that means it's not in flood zone A. It may be in flood zone X. I have the schedule with me, and staff has that schedule. I thought we deal with flood zone A because it's probably the first to flood, and then the other properties we can discuss anytime we'd like.
Not to belabor that here, but we talk about that building fairly frequently. So, okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I guess you did such a great job with that quick presentation. No question.
So, Commissioner Bozovich, just clarifying, staff's recommending that we go with the $5,000 deductible.
I am. That's consistent with what we have on the MLK properties. Not really that much more of a cost if we need to use it.
Yep, an extra $7,000, basically.
Right.
Okay. If there's no further questions, I'd entertain a motion to approve Order 16-03-15-09 and authorizing Ms. Lacy to sign the application documents for flood insurance.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Passed unanimous. Thank you.
Just one more thing. There's a 30-day waiting period, so once we sign the documents, if we have a flood the next day, we're not covered.
Important to know.
It's supposed to be sunny for the next few days.
Water gets turned off here.
Right.
Well, we can take it out of the agenda team's pocket.
There you go.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. So next is Commissioner's business. Do we have any announcements? Yes, I have a couple. I would also like to extend a thank you to Sheriff Trapp today. I know that he's not, he's out of the county at the present time today, but just wanted to share that he's been incredibly engaged and easy to contact. I've had, must have been my run this last week, but I had 3 separate issues, one in Cottage Grove, Pleasant Hill, and out Marcola. And I really appreciate his ability to get right on these items and help out and find resolutions. So thank you, Sheriff, for your great assistance. Then the other item I wanted to bring up is, I hope I'm not stealing any thunder, but I wanted to congratulate the Oregon Ducks for winning the Pac-12 championship and also securing a #1 seed. I'm looking forward to great basketball games over the next a couple weeks, and I'm hoping that Beans the Beavers made the tournament for the first time in 26 years, and they happen to be in the same bracket as the Ducks in the West. That maybe I think game
In the Elite Eight.
in 2 weeks, if they can survive, there might be a Oregon Duck versus Beaver game. Who
What if the
knows?
Ducks conference losses this to Oregon State?
And the Oregon State women have made the tournament again themselves in a #2 seed, the highest ever. So congratulations to Oregon and Oregon State for some great basketball playing, and looking forward to tournament time and what they can produce.
The winner of that game would go to the Final Four.
Yes, it would.
Commissioner Sorensen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You brought up something that I also wanted to add to, and that is the responsiveness of the elected officials here at Lane County, most notably Sheriff Trapp. He's also been very responsive to me and any questions any of my constituents have had. He's been right on it. I really appreciate that. But also Mike Coles and the district attorney, Ms. Patty Perlow, they have also, I think that this has been a kind of a unique period, at least in my experience on the board, where the other elected officials are really, I think, part of the overall team, and I really think it's been great. Ms. Perlow has been very active with, of course, the effort to get as many prosecutions as possible because of the additional state funding that comes as a result of prosecutions. That's been a really great thing. Mike Coles has been very innovative. He's been working with the assessors around the state to try to pool the resources and get the best bang for the buck. I think that's been great. And as you mentioned, Sheriff Trapp and the responsiveness, and so I think it's been very positive in all those categories. Thanks for bringing that up.
I agree, Commissioner. Thank you. Mr. Bozovich?
Thank you. So I just want to remind folks that this weekend is the annual Daffodil Drive out there to the Long Tom Grange. You know, come on out and see some flowers along the roads leading to the Grange, and stop in and have a cinnamon roll. So always a great family event.
Okay, thanks. Other announcements? Mr. Lykin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to offer my congratulations to Oregon State, both men's basketball programs, #1 seed, first time in history. By the way, I believe this is the first time that Oregon and Oregon State are in the tournament at the same time, and which is pretty amazing. Of course, the Oregon State women's team, what a great year they've had. And for anybody who is wondering if Devin Allen has recovered from his injury, he is the 60-meter high hurdle NCAA indoor champion, and so good for him. As we know, as when he was a freshman, he won the outdoor championship, NCAA and Pac-12, but he is the 60-meter indoor champion, so good congratulations to him. Another great year by University of Oregon track and field, and anyway, so it's great to be a Duck, and great to see athletics doing quite well, and but it also brings, I believe, continued prominence to both of our universities, and the research that they're involved in, the economic development opportunities they're involved in, and just as higher learning institutions. Congratulations to both.
Commissioner Farr?
Just add congratulations to the Ducks and to the Beavers. Mr. Dingle, the last time the Beavers were in the NC2A tournament, Gary Payton was a senior. And this time his son is a senior. So that's a fitting bookends to the void of their absence. And also reminded that the men and the women, Oregon men's and women's track teams, both won the national championship over the weekend. So 2 more national championship trophies will be on display at the Hatfield-Dowling complex. So it's the Conference of Champions continues to pad its resume.
Commissioner Sorensen?
I'll just mention, with the focus today on college basketball, that the Oregonian has a high school basketball website, which I often review, and one of the top player in the state of Oregon, Peyton Pritchard of Westland High School, has been recruited by the University of Oregon, #1 in the state. The #2 player in the state, according to the Oregonian's high school basketball website, is Eli Leininger. Mr. Leininger is the son of Tom Leininger, who was a Lane County commissioner. And Mr. Leininger, that is Eli Leininger, is graduating from South Eugene High School, and he is already committed to play basketball for Yale University. Pretty impressive, and I think that's worth noting. So the 2 top basketball players in the state are going to be going to the U of O and Yale.
And Yale's in the tournament this year.
Yes, they are.
All right, well, thank you.
And the sports has been brought to you by
County Commissioners. So we'll move to item B, which is agenda team requests and work session requests. I believe Commissioner Farr, did you?
I do. I am the council liaison to the Animal Advisory Committee, and they have a number of items. We have a couple of veterinarians on the board, very, very committed committee. And one item they've been talking about for quite some time now has been dog licensing, and the fact that most people forego the law and do not license their dogs. Some people say it's hard to do so. If you click on Lane County's website, click on Animal Services, you can do it right there, but not everybody knows how to do that. So what they continue to ask for is consideration of a county-wide dog licensing ordinance. Now, currently, the cities have their own dog licensing. Some of the cities do. Cottage Grove, for instance, does. City of Eugene does. Springfield does. And all very effective programs, but none of them dig deeply into universal licensing. So the veterans in particular on the board, on the committee, are interested in what would it take to consider a county-wide dog licensing ordinance. So what I'd like to ask for as an agenda team request is to get a report back from Mr. Russell, Mike Russell, who I talked to briefly about this last night, and he has much of the data that's involved in this report, so it wouldn't take a great deal of staff time to compile the information. A report back on what are different municipalities doing in Lane County as far as dog licenses is concerned. Also, the percentage of is going to be an estimated number of dogs that are licensed, and is there a recommendation that we can consider for a county-wide ordinance, understanding that municipalities do not necessarily want to participate in a county-wide dog licensing. So I'm asking for just head nods to see if we could get that report back from Mr. Russell and from his staff, which is pretty much him, regarding county-wide dog licensing.
Can I ask for a point of clarification, Commissioner Farr? Are you asking, because there's a potential legal issue there, are you talking about an ordinance that would go on top of or supersede the city ordinances?
I don't particularly have a recommendation there, Mr. Dingle. I think whichever one would be the easiest to consider. I would suspect that it would supersede. That's kind of what the what the veterinarians were looking for, is something that would be easier to access through vets' offices and through online, or even one of the vets said so you could go into a 7-Eleven and license your dog. So now that may be stretching it, going into a 7-Eleven and licensing your dog. But it's, once again, this is a preliminary, simply a report back to see if there is a possibility of moving forward with a consideration.
Okay, do we have support? Got one?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have support to bring that as an agenda item. Was there other agenda items? Commissioner Lyken?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I would just ask the agenda team to take a look at, based on what we heard yesterday, that Lynn County looks like they are moving forward on the unfunded mandate provision and potentially suing the state of Oregon over the minimum wage. I don't know if it's something we should engage in, but I think it would be worthwhile at least having some sort of conversation about whether it's something that Lane County wants to get involved in. I'm guessing, it sounds like to me there's going to be potentially be other counties that are also going to be having a serious look at this, but at least I would just ask that, if the agenda team can schedule maybe an executive session, whatever the case may be, and at least have this discussion if this is worthwhile for us to even entertain, and that's my request.
Okay. Commissioner Bozovich?
I'd just like to add to that. I support the idea of having an agenda item or even an exec session item on that. If we also look at the sick leave law relative to unfunded mandate at the same time.
Okay. We have support? Another support for that? I guess
Not from me, just to be clear. I think it'd be a bad thing if we got involved in fighting the state over the protections that are afforded by Oregon's minimum wage law.
Okay.
That's fine.
That's fine. So we do have support to have that as an item in the future. Any others?
Yes, one more.
Mr. Bozovich?
So I did note earlier that I attended the Indian Creek Landscape Management Plan public meeting that Forest Service had last Thursday in Mapleton, and there is some opportunity for the board to comment. I don't have a final date comments are due. They mentioned at the meeting they were thinking about April 1st, so we do have a couple weeks to maybe put something together to get before the board on March 29th. If it's later than that, we may have even more time, but I don't know if this is something we want to refer to the legislative committee to prepare a letter to the Forest Service on. There are a couple items there, in particular road closure issues and the fact that they are looking at doing most of the work there under the stewardship contracting, which with the lack of secure rural schools impacts our actual revenue into the road fund if they use stewardship contracting versus standard contracting in any of the work they do. So I think there's several items that the county should weigh in on relative to the Indian Creek Landscape Management Plan on behalf of the county and also on behalf of our citizens that are extremely concerned and upset about multiple issues there, from the placement of wood in the creek system there, because most of the creek system is actually adjacent to private land, and changes in the course of that creek can actually impact private lands pretty severely. It's one of these odd little places in the forest where the creek bottom areas were settled by settlers long ago and are private property, and all the hillsides and ridge lines are owned by the Forest Service. So it's a really intermixed area of private and public lands, and I think there's necessity for the board to weigh in and ask for that cooperation we would ask from any federal agency in preparing a land management plan for natural resources.
Okay. Well, may I suggest that if we get board support, that Mr. Kyler and you work together on drafting a letter and have it given to the agenda team for the last meeting in March. We don't have a meeting next week, so So if there's concurrence on that,
Yeah.
looks like we got support to make that an item.
Thank you.
Others, Commissioner Farr?
Mr. Chair, just a clarification regarding the two issues that were brought up earlier for the agenda team to consider. That is the recently passed state law on minimum wage and on unfunded mandates in general. I don't think anybody here is wanting to supersede state law in any way, shape, or form, and I want to make certain that we have a great deal of discussion surrounding both of the items, and that's the reason for my support in bringing it forward to the agenda team, is not to supersede state law by any means, but to take a look at it and to respond to the people who are sending lots of emails, making lots of phone calls, and talking to probably each of us out on the street. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Lycan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that, Commissioner Farr. Frankly, at this point in time, I don't know how I personally feel about it. But given that if the unfunded mandate provision has been dealt, or is in a sense, if there is truly an unfunded mandate, I think it's actually worth at least looking into it. I mean, that's really where I'm at right now. I mean, we're looking at about a $6 million hole. This potentially can add another $300,000 to $500,000, I think is the analysis I saw, and onto our issue, our budget challenges. I don't know if it's right or wrong, and all I'm interested in doing is I know Lynn County is moving forward, seems to be moving forward on this, and I'm just more or less trying to gather information if this is the right thing to do or not, and frankly, I don't know, and I haven't made a decision whatsoever, but I think it's important at least have a look at it, and then being able to make a firm decision after that.
Okay. All right. See no further items for agenda team requests or work sessions. We will move to our executive session. So the Board of Commissioners will meet in executive session to consult with counsel concerning the legal rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation and litigation likely to be filed. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.660, subsection 2, subsection H, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed above. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decisions will be made in executive session, and we will reserve the right to come back into public session. So with that, we will move to the executive session up at the conference room. At the conclusion of the executive session, we will recess for lunch and return down here to Harris Hall for a 1:30 public hearing and the remainder of our items. So with that, we're in executive session.